Welcome to Conversation with Buddy. I'm your host, Buddy Puckett. Well, I do know college football is over and the Super Bowl is coming here in a couple weeks, so excited about that. I like football season. And anyway, 2025 is here. I'll keep talking about it a little bit through January and maybe parts of February. But how do you do on your goals? Are you accountable? Are you sticking to them? Is there some, oftentimes people try to focus on mini goals. Maybe they want to lose weight, go to the gym, get in shape, work more, whatever it is. I would suggest pick one and really focus in on that one. And then once you conquer that one after about 90 days, then maybe introduce a second one. So there you go. That's it. Today, though, it's not about goals necessarily, but we're going to introduce a guy I met recently. And his name is Spenser EvanKo. Welcome, Spenser.
Hey, how are you, buddy?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Good, man.
So, Rick Herman, you guys were out for breakfast, coffee at Starbucks.
Yep.
Probably, maybe 2 months ago?
Yeah, about that.
Okay. Doing your little Bible study on a Tuesday morning, and Rick introduced me to you, and you're a podcast guy.
Yes.
So, now, let's talk about your podcast a little bit. Actually, let me introduce you real quick, and then we'll talk about your podcast because it has a title to it.
Yep.
So let's walk through who you are. And number one, you've been together with your wife for about 15 years.
Yep.
And what's your wife's name?
Caitlin. Yeah.
And that's a blessing, man, to be married.
Oh, dude. Yeah, huge. It's the second biggest blessing I have in my life.
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah. What's the first one?
Relationship with God. Honestly.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. You have 4 kids. Tell me your kids' ages, their names and their ages.
So my oldest is Bentley. He's 14. Next is my daughter Paisley. She's 11. And then I have twins that are 8, Hudson and Lincoln. So
3 boys, 1 girl.
Yep.
Okay, so she's outnumbered.
Oh, dude, but she holds her own.
She's tough, man.
Yeah, she fights like nobody's business.
Okay. That's awesome. You are currently the youth pastor at Free Church. That's in South Salem.
Yep.
You enjoy being outdoors, hiking, fishing, and hunting.
Yep.
I think I asked you before, but which one do you like most, hiking, fishing, or hunting? What's the one you had to pick?
Depends what I'm doing, but lately I've had a kind of a love for fishing. My boys are getting in that phase where they're starting to really get into it.
Yeah.
So it's fun to go. Like it used to be fun for me to go and fish and catch something or whatever,
Right.
but now it's like it's fun to see them catch a fish and just the bright eye and they just wow, look what I'm pulling up. And
Totally.
I was actually just out at Almsville Pond or St. Louis Ponds a couple days ago and fishing, and it was freezing cold. We didn't catch anything, but we're still out there.
It's fun, man.
Yeah.
I grew up fishing, hunting, a little bit of hiking, but I have 2 daughters, and so this year, my daughters are 27 and 25. Mm-hmm. My oldest daughter's like, "Hey, Dad, I think I'm ready to go hunting." I'm like, "Sweet." So we're going to go hunting this year. So it's going to be pretty cool.
Never. That's awesome.
We're going to go kill something.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
All right. You grew up Mormon and was saved at the age of 21. That's going to be an interesting story. I can't wait to unpack that. Yeah. You're constantly pushing yourself to learn and grow in your relationship and knowledge of God and the Bible. You worked for the Department of Corrections for 10 years. And the last thing is I added is that you had a podcast called what?
Beyond the Bars.
Beyond the Bars.
Yeah.
When you and Rick, when Rick introduced you and I, he was saying that you had a podcast called Beyond the Bars. I'm like, oh, you must be fresh out of prison, right?
Right.
That's where my mind went.
Yep. That was the whole point. Like I wanted something to kind of snag people's attention.
Okay. It snagged my attention. Like,
yeah.
This could be really good. Come to find out, you weren't in prison.
No, I've spent a lot of time in prison, but never stayed the night in prison and like actually slept overnight.
So Beyond the Bars, then, to help somebody understand what that podcast is about.
Yeah.
Which point of view are you?
So I was a correctional officer for 10 years. I worked for the Oregon Department of Corrections. I started as an officer and then worked my way up to lieutenant, and then ended up leaving for a plethora of reasons. But one of those main reasons that I kind of left was I was struggling with a lot of PTSD. And man, working in prison, no matter how close you are to God, no matter how good of a person you are, it changes you. It's a dark environment. It's hard. It's the things you see and deal with and experience. It's different than being a police officer, being a firefighter, where you might have a lot of positive interactions with the general public, people thanking you for what you're doing. Corrections, man, nobody ever thanks you.
There's nothing positive.
It's always negative. You're always battling against negative. I mean, there are highlights, there are good times, but I was actually just talking with a friend of mine about this the other day. I was like, as a firefighter, you can, on Christmas Day, if you're working, you can do a prime rib and have your family down to the fire station and see them on Christmas. Man, there's none of that in corrections. When
you're behind the walls, you're gone.
Man,
you're in.
You're in. That's all you do. And yeah, it can be dark.
Yeah. Well, hey, I want to take you back a little bit. I want you to really unpack kind of where'd you grow up at? What was life like? Because you and I talked a little bit about a lot of times the people in prison are young men who had fatherless homes. There was no father at home. So I want to really dive in a little bit like that, but I know you have a story to share how you grew up Mormon, and I really want to understand what that religion's like. Because at the end of the day, I think we all want to go to heaven, right? Is that the goal?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
So how do we get to heaven? That's what I want you to unpack for the audience. I know, I believe I know the truth, but what if you grew up in a different religion, like Mormonism? So where'd you grow up? What were your parents like? Yeah. How do they impact you?
So I grew up in Dallas, Oregon.
Yep.
It's a pretty small town. It was a lot smaller when I was growing up. It's grown quite a bit. The town that I grew up in is not what it is today, but grew up, riding bikes all over town, like kind of that, like leave in the morning and come back at night type thing. We had the Rickrell Creek run right behind our house, so a lot of time was spent down there just kind of hanging out, playing. Spent a lot of time. There's a farm a couple doors down from us, so spent a lot of time, working on that, hanging out with animals, like helping friends with chores, stuff like that. But overall, like I had like the good, I would say, like American childhood. Like I was homeschooled on and off throughout my entire childhood. Spent some time in public school, mainly in elementary school. So that was kind of different, but also allowed me the opportunity to be outdoors more, to be interacting more with adults. Started kind of full-time working around 13. So it's like that work ethic, like building that into kind of my DNA. But my childhood was interesting. Where I said I had a pretty good childhood, I did, but I was actually sexually abused from age 6 to 12. So that was a big hurdle and confusing and hard thing. Nobody knew about it. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't really know how to say things or how to like come out and bring that forward. So I was always battling that as a kid, and kind of being lost in the mix. I'm one of 8 kids. My parents all from the same mom and dad, that Mormon, lifestyle of have a bunch of kids and raise them in the church. And, so I spent a lot of time, I'm like the oldest of the second family. It's like when you have a large family of 2 families, right?
The oldest of the second family. Okay. So, was there a gap? So where were you at in the lineup? So and is there a large gap?
Yeah, I'm in the middle. Okay. So I have 3 younger siblings.
So you're number 5. Yep. The 4 and 5, or the 4 and 5 have to. You're the smack in the middle.
Yep.
Okay.
So
you're the oldest of the younger bunch.
Oldest of the younger. So I kind of, in some ways, like I didn't follow after what everybody else did, because that's kind of what my older siblings did. And I mean, there's a 10-year difference between me and my oldest sibling. So
what about you and the next sibling up though?
There is 2 years.
Okay.
So
are you guys close? Are you guys the closest there? Or?
No, just kind of based off of family dynamics, beliefs, and just dysfunction. I don't really have a whole lot of connection or relationship with my family. So
okay.
And that's kind of a protection method I've had to put into place to have, just protection for me and my family and my kids, just to kind of break dysfunction. So
okay, so you grew up in the big city of Dallas.
Yep.
When you talk about riding your bike and the farm and animals, I grew up in the same, had a bike, me and my buddies, we'd ride our bikes all day and had to do the chores and feed the animals. And so I lived a little bit like your lifestyle. So I totally get that. I didn't have 8 siblings or 7 siblings. I had 1. Okay. So as you grew up, were your mom and dad always Mormon, like from the day you were born, or when did they convert to Mormonism?
Yeah. So as far as I know, they were very young when they were brought in the Mormon church. They might have been their entirety of their life. But I was always raised Mormon. Like all of my siblings were raised Mormon. So it was kind of, it was just what we did. Okay. It was just the church that they went to.
So from the day you were born, you remember going to church on Sundays?
Yeah.
To the Mormon church?
3 hours every Sunday.
3 hours.
It's every Sunday, 3 hours. Your first hour is spent in everybody's in the same room, so you have all families, everybody, kids, and a message is shared. You partake in communion, or they call it sacrament. But everything's very planned out, very religious, very. And I'll say this because I don't mind, but it's a cult. It's set up on a cult premise of works-based salvation. So it's what you do as a person gets you into the higher levels of heaven. Okay. They believe in multiple different levels of heaven, but everything's just very rigid. There's no room for error. There's no room for change. It's whatever the prophet says to do, that's what you do.
Is that so? The Mormon preacher, so to speak, they call that a prophet?
So there's the head prophet that's in Utah, and then they break it down from there. Everything's broken into regions down to the local church. So it's like you have a region of like the United States, and then you have a region of what part of the country you're in, and then you have people that are overseeing every section of that all the way down to what they call the bishop that's over the
bishop
local church.
is the local the bishop. Okay, so going to church, walk me through kind of that journey, because I know there's a point in time where you chose not to believe that. What's that look like? Unpack that.
So it kind of coincides with the abuse I was experiencing, but I was always really questioning God. Like, I never didn't believe in God. I always believed there was a God, right? But I was just questioning, like, how is it, what have I done to create the situation that I'm in of being abused, and what am I doing wrong to have that continue? And at age 8, that's when Mormons believe that you can be baptized and start being held accountable for your sins, right? So at age 8, that's when they call it the age of accountability. Yeah. And you go to the bishop and you meet with him and say, hey, I want to get baptized. And then he figures out if you're worthy and ready, and if you know all the right things to say and believe all the right things to be able to join the church. And so I remember at age 8, I did that, and I went sat down and talked with the bishop, and he was telling me, like, hey, like, if you don't take sacrament or communion from now on Sundays, and you basically die, you can't get into the highest level of heaven. And I'm like, oh, okay, because you won't be forgiven of your sins. Like, you have to physically partake of communion to have forgiveness of sins. And I was like, oh, okay, like, that's so confusing to me. So I'm like, what happens if I take, sacrament on Sunday, and then I die Monday or Tuesday after I sin? Like, and then I'm like, well, but if God's love and God's all loving and he's a good God, like, why would he do that? Like, I wouldn't get to the highest. So it just didn't add up in my mind, right? If God's perfect, if God's love, like, that he would set that up, So I started questioning and kind of being confused about that at age 8. And then I didn't say anything because I was too scared. Like, at that point, like, everybody had fallen in line. Like, my siblings had gone to BYU, like, my brothers were going on missions, like, so it was just like all that they were following all in line. And I was like, I don't believe, but like, there's just, I don't know what to do with it. Yeah. Right. I'm 8. So I got baptized, and then at age 12, they believe in like the priesthood, the laying on of hands. And I believe they take that from Acts, where the apostles were laying on hands, and the priesthood was passed on to the next person. It had the same thing. Like, I got the lowest level of that at 12. And again, it was like, I didn't believe, But by the same hand, I couldn't say anything. I was too scared to say anything. I was like, man.
When you say scared, just walk me through that. I mean, would your parents beat you? Do they condemn you? What's from a Mormon perspective? What does that look like to be afraid? Or
it wouldn't be like a beating or anything. It would just be like it was like guilt and shame. It was just like, man,
that's almost even worse. I'd almost rather be beaten. Like,
same any day of the week.
Guilt and shame.
But yeah, it's just
emotional.
That well, you're not going to be with us up in heaven, because I would hear, like, growing up, it'd be like, oh well, Uncle so and so, they know that the Mormon church is true, but they're not walking in that, so they're not going to be with us, right? Like, because the Mormons believe you can be together with your family, sealed for time and all eternity, and they would say that, like, oh, so and so, well, they're good people on earth, but they're not going to be in heaven with us. Like, they're not going to be there for time and all eternity. And the other portion of that just kind of like never really made sense is like, Mormons believe that you can become like Jesus, right? That Jesus is just like us, but from a different planet, right?
So unpack that for just a moment, because that, I've heard that Jesus, they look at Jesus as the brother of Satan.
Yep.
So I'll let you unpack from there. Is he not the Son of God? I mean, in this picture, or what is that?
So what they believe is, yes, he is the Son of God, but they also believe that he is like us, that Satan and Jesus were like us, that they were put on an earth, they lived through, they made it to heaven, and that God put them in charge of this earth, right? Okay. And they basically held like up in heaven, and it's super confusing, and this is where it gets cultish and kind of weird, for me anyways. Yeah. But they believe that God allowed his sons and daughters to come up with plans to save the people of this earth. And with that, Satan and Jesus came forth and brought forward a plan. And Satan's plan was he was going to force everybody. There was not going to be any free will or agency. Everybody would have to do good. They would have to do good. And then they would all the kids would make it back to heaven, right? And then Jesus' plan was free will, agency, coming down on earth, being crucified on the cross. And then if you accept Jesus and if you go to join the Mormon church and if you follow all the rules, right, then you get up into heaven.
Okay. So he is the Son of God, but in a way he may not be deity where he is God.
Correct. And that's they believe that that's something you can earn, right? By your works.
Okay,
right?
So the salvation would be Jesus plus some
Correct.
Good works.
Correct.
But you and I know that isn't
absolutely
true.
Not.
It's Jesus
absolutely
plus
not.
Nothing.
Correct.
Equals salvation.
Right.
Okay.
A free gift is not free if you have to do any work for it, right? And that's why, like, biblically, it says a free gift, right? Yeah. Because they want to emphasize that, right? You cannot purchase a gift. There's nothing you can do.
Nothing you can do to earn it.
To earn it. It's a free gift. So.
Okay, so you're 8, you get baptized, you're 12, you're trying to get to that next level, but you're not really.
Yep. I was basically just going through the motions at that point. And I started at age 12, I started hanging out with some friends that were not, we weren't doing anything bad. We weren't breaking into houses or anything, but we were doing the thing where, I'd get a beer or, get some chew or smoke a cigarette or whatever. Yeah. And as I'm just doing like the normal, like middle school boy stuff, right?
Your friend says, try it, you're going to do it.
Yeah. And
you don't want to disappoint your buddy.
I'm like, I don't want to let him down, which I hope my kids don't do that, obviously,
but they have
we
got
to make decisions, right?
Will.
We got to make choices, right?
Yeah.
So even with that, I started like going off that, and that was just like, I was the first kid to really do anything like that. It was just like
in your family,
in my family, right? And it was just
you're
like,
that kid. You're the black sheep.
I was the black sheep, literally. And so I started getting involved in stuff. So my parents decided they were going to move from Dallas to West Salem. So here I am, kind of the self-made country bumpkin kid moving from small town of Dallas to West Salem, where like kids are all trendy and bougie, and like, there's nothing wrong with that, but it was a complete culture shock for me. I went from being in a house next to a creek where I could just get dirty and muddy all the time to like, when I was older, I'd go mudding and my neighbors would freak out because I'd be spraying my mud into the drain. They'd be like, you can't do that. You got to shovel it up and like pick. And I'm like,
what?
Whoa, like
Come on.
It was crazy. But so it was a bit of a culture shock. And they always said that was to get me out of that lifestyle, to hopefully bring me back in.
So they moved to West Salem to bring you out of that.
Okay. to bring me back. And that was what they said. I mean, that was part of it. There's some other stuff going on too.
Okay.
But yeah, it was interesting. So I started, by that point, about 13, 14, I started working full time. I started working with a guy who was installing appliances. And it just kind of happened out to where he's like, hey, I need you to crawl in this house. I can't fit. Like, I need you to run a water line from point A to point B. And like, when I got into that construction world, man, I loved it. I loved everything about it.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things with my abuse, I was always trying to prove that I was strong, that I was capable, that I could do anything. Like I wanted to be tough. I wanted to just be in that 1%. And, like, man, being in construction, like, that gave that to me in a sense, because I was able to learn things. I was able to, run faster than everybody else. I was able to build faster than everybody else. I could work longer. I'd show up early. I would stay late.
You had something to prove. You had to become worthy.
Yeah.
Because maybe you felt unworthy. Just a quick question though. You're abused sexually from 6 to 12. How did the abuse stop at 12? Like, what was the caveat? Man,
I had an interaction with a neighbor kid actually, where he was making fun of me. And so he was making fun of me for skateboarding. So I just snapped anger wise. I had really bad anger problems for the majority of my life. And a lot of that stemmed from my abuse. And I picked up my skateboard and I hit him, and it felt good. And so I hit him again, and he fell to the ground. I hit him a third time. And then he was laying on his stomach, and I climbed on his back, and he had a necklace, and I pulled it up and I started choking him. And like, everybody was like, oh, like, he kind of had it coming when I was hitting him with a skateboard. Like, because there's like probably 10 neighbor kids out there, right? And everybody's like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Like, he had it coming, But then when I start choking him, like, everybody's, freaking out, screaming, oh, you're going to kill it. Like, so they're just minds blown, right? It was actually my older brother who came and like pulled me off. And then the kid like left me alone after that. And like, the funny thing is I didn't even get in trouble for that, because they're like, his mom's like, well, he had it coming. Like,
he had it coming.
Like, don't make fun of him,
Sweet.
But I learned in that moment, it was empowering. It's like, man, like, I can physically stand up to people. Like, I can, like, the skateboarder became my equalizer. Like, I will beat somebody down,
Okay.
So that's so at that point, I ended up standing up to my abuser. I was like, hey, this is not going to happen anymore. Yeah. So
that probably shocked this person.
Yeah. No, like, they didn't know what to do. They're like, oh, like, okay. Like,
well, it's like bullies really are insecure people.
Yeah.
So the sexual abuse, it's almost like bullying, probably.
100%.
Until you call them out, and they're confused by that. Like, so.
And I just want to say too, like, first and foremost, like, if anybody's experiencing that or going through that or has gone through that, if you're going through it right now, find somebody safe to talk to, like, immediately. Yeah. Like, first and foremost, it's not your fault. No matter what, like, if you're being abused, that's 100% not your fault in any way, shape, or form. That's not your burden to carry. Find help. Find either a trusted teacher, a mentor, somebody at church. Like, report it to somebody safe and get it out there, because when you report it, that allows people to come in and help you, because you most likely won't have the tools or the ability to, like, help yourself. And you don't need to continue that at all. So, well,
to your point, how long did you carry that burden though? Even though you stood up to the guy, were you able to recognize right then, like,
no,
you're done?
I've carried it with me, and I'm still in therapy currently, like today, dealing with it.
And how old are you today?
I'm 35.
Okay, that wound, God can take that wound away, but it's right there. We don't necessarily forget those pain points.
And that's really like the driving force that kind of started pushing me in my life in the direction I went. By like 16, like I'm working full time on the job site, and most of the guys I'm working with, man, they'll buy me beer, they'll buy me chew, they'll buy me whatever. They don't care. Like, they'll buy me whatever I ask them for. And, I'm giving guys rides that are like 40 years old. They don't have driver's license,
they lost their license
I'm like,
from DUI.
I'm like, hey, buy me a can of chew. Okay, cool, man. Like, I'll buy, hey, you want some beer too? Oh yeah, I'll take some beer, So I'm just like completely pushing after self-medication at that point. Like on the one hand, I'm working very hard, which is good, and I'm being productive, but I'm using that to kind of create my identity. And two, I'm self-medicating when I'm not working, So like my parents kind of knew, but they didn't know. Kind of everything came to a head when I was 16 or 17. I had gone with some friends. So I was supposed to be staying the night at a friend's house. Yeah. And then we decided we were going to go to a movie. So I had my girlfriend and my friend in the car, and I had a pink 67 Mustang, which is a wonderful car.
That sounds like a cool car, man.
Went as fast as I could go anywhere all the time. Just
the whole thing was pink.
The whole thing was pink.
You gotta be really tough if you're gonna drive a pink car. Like,
bro, it was. I was always blasting either gangster rap or death metal. Because you have to have that. Like, I'm driving a pink car, but like I'm listening to hardcore music.
I'm a tough dude. Don't mess with me.
So I'm cruising all around West Salem, acting hard. Like, little did I know I really wasn't that hard. I got my friend and my girlfriend. We go to a movie, and we're downtown at the movie theater down there, and we get out, and it had been raining a little bit. So of course I'm just like power sliding all the corners and just raging. And I get over the bridge, and my buddy screams in my ear. He's like, "Hey, pull over. There's a cop behind you." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I pull over, getting into West Salem, and the cop pulls out, and he sees this young kid, and he's very thankful for this cop. He could have just hung me out to dry, but he didn't. He's just like, "Hey man, like, get out of the car." He like pulled me out, and he starts having a conversation. He's like, "What's your deal, dude?" And I'm like, "I don't know." He's like, "Why didn't you pull over?" I was like, "I didn't know you were behind me." And he's like, "Let me guess, you listen to loud music." I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Okay, what's going on? Who's in the car?" I was like, "A friend, girlfriend." He's like, "Okay, cool." So he's like, "I'm going to write you a speeding ticket, but I could hit you for, reckless endangerment, all this stuff." And he's like, "But you got to call your parents, and they got to come pick you up." And I'm like, "Could you please just write me the tickets?" Like,
I'll take whatever.
I'll take the tickets, like, because I'd already dealt with that on my own without my parents knowing. And so he calls. My mom comes and picks me up. She's disappointed. I drop my friend off, my girlfriend, and then go home. And my dad's waiting up for me. And it's like that disappointment. They're not saying anything to me, so I know like I screwed up. And my mom's just like, I can't believe like you're doing this. You're, what are you doing with your life? You're running in the ground. And my dad's like, "Well, what about your mission? Like, what? Don't you want to go on?" And I was like, so at that point I just blew up. I was like, "Man, like, I don't believe in the Mormon church. I don't believe in what you guys believe in, and I'm not going on a mission. Like, period."
And you're 17?
Yeah, 17.
Okay.
And at that point, like my parents were just devastated. Like, it was like, they were just basically like, "Okay, well, like, we don't know what to do." Like, that was what they were trying to like kind of prod me with, was like, "Oh, you don't want to be unworthy to go on your mission, because there's certain things you can do that create you to be unworthy to go on a mission."
Yeah.
So I was just like, "Okay, cool." Like, and at that point, my dad's like, "Fine, it's time for you to move out." Like,
really,
you've graduated high school, like, you're working, you don't want to follow our rules, like, move out. And like, that was probably one of the best things that could have ever happened to me.
Yeah.
Kind of got some freedom. I ended up moving down with my uncle in Southern California. He runs a remodeling business down there. So, I was able to work. And after about a year and a half of shoveling stucco in 120-degree weather, like wearing long sleeves and pants, I was just like, I was kind of done. I was just like, man, I don't know if I want to do this the rest of my life. Yeah. My parents, with a couple other people, had purchased some pizza parlors here in Salem, one in South Salem, one in West Salem, the old Garlic Gyms, and then they bought a Taco Del Mar in Corvallis.
Okay.
And they were looking for somebody to manage the Taco Del Mar. And I was like, "Well, I can do that." Like, we kind of patched things up a little bit to where they're like, "Okay, you just need to be your own man, go do your own thing." And I was 18 at the time, so I was like, I was legal to do whatever I wanted. Yeah. So moved back up here, kind of got into the restaurant scene, and that's where I actually, met my wife, she was working at the pizza parlor, and it was, we hated each other. Like at first, I thought she was the entitled, employee, and she thought I was the entitled, boss's son.
Yeah.
So
match made in heaven, man.
Oh, dude, it was great. Hated each other, but then after a while, she started going bowling with a bunch of coworkers, and my brother was working there, so he's like, "Hey, like, come hang out with us." I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So,
younger brother or older brother?
Older brother.
Okay.
But actually, my younger brother was too, so both of them were there. So it's kind of both. So I was hanging out with them, and then she kind of started catching my eye, and it's like, "Oh, hey, like, she's all right," like, and then it was actually on her birthday that I just texted her. I was like, "Oh, happy birthday," and then we just kind of hit it off from there and started talking and dating, and yeah.
Is she the same age as you?
She is 2 years younger than me.
Okay. So you guys dated for how long before you guys get married?
Oh, we dated for it's like 10 months.
Wow.
So, yeah, and it was we actually ended up, so we conceived my son, and it was actually 2 days or 3 days before he was born.
Yeah.
3 days. I'm horrible with dates.
Yeah.
So 3 days before he was born, we actually got married.
Cool.
That was something to both of us. Like, I wasn't saved at the time, but it was something important to both of us that like he was born and we were married.
Yeah.
Not from conception, but it was just important for both of us to know that his entire life we've been married.
Was there some kind of conviction going on right here? Because you've left the Mormon, church. You're no longer going down that road. You're not saved yet. What's going on in your life right now?
So I business-wise, I had opened up another restaurant.
Okay.
But it ended up, due to just kind of the economy, I ended up losing both of them.
Okay.
So I was trying to figure out like what I was going to do with my life, trying to find work, jump back into construction, doing commercial roofing.
Yeah.
And for me, I wasn't really seeking anything. I was just living. I was just like, my main focus was like provision. Like, I got to provide. Because I talked with my wife, and I was like, hey, like, what do you want to do? Do you want to work? Do you want to be a stay-at-home mom? Like, either way, don't care. The option's yours. You can have a career if you want. You can work or be stay-at-home.
Yeah.
But if you stay at home, that means I'm probably going to have to work a lot to provide, and you're going to have to take care of home stuff. And she's like, man, like, she grew up in a single mother home, and her mom was always working jobs, always hustling, always took care of her, always provided.
Yeah.
But she's like, man, I want to give my kids what I couldn't have, and I want to give them a mom at home all the time. So, which I really commend her for that, because like, that was what I was hoping. But again, like, I wanted her to choose. I didn't want to come in and be like, this is what you're doing.
I'm the law here.
Exactly.
Right.
So she chose to do that. And then, so I was like, okay, that's on incumbent upon me. Single people out there, like, another word of advice, man, like, the two most important decisions you're going to make in your life is who you marry and who you worship. If you worship God and seek after him with all your heart, mind, and strength, you're going to marry the right person. And if you marry the right person and you're worshiping God, your life's not going to necessarily be easy, but God's going to take care of you, and you're going to have a better time and a easier time than you would if you don't. So, luckily, God blessed me with my wife before I found him. And I knew I was going to marry her. So we ended up getting married, obviously. But, as I was seeking like what I wanted to do, kind of, and I think part of this, comes back to like the identity of my abuse and stuff. And like, I wanted to help people, and I wanted to protect people. I wanted to prevent people from going through what I went through. So I was like, man, like, I always wanted to be a cop as a kid. Like, I wanted to be on the road. I wanted to be, upholding the law. And as I started seeking that, there was a advertisement in the newspaper for a private security company. So I was like, all right, man, I'm gonna apply that, because obviously you can't roof year round in Oregon. So in the down season, you go on unemployment and you just wait for work. So I applied and got hired on and started working, and I loved it. Like, I genuinely loved the job. I eventually worked up to being armed security and loved that realm. And so I was like, telling my wife when busy season started up, I was like, hey, like, it's going to sound crazy, but I kind of want to stick with this full time and not go back to roofing. She's like, yeah, whatever you want to do. And that's where it's important to marry, somebody who's going to support you.
Amen to that.
Because she was willing to give up money for the sake of me following my dreams.
Yeah.
And that was huge.
Yeah.
So I started chasing after that. I started applying for jobs on the road. I started applying for reserve police positions. Mm-hmm. Kept failing, like wouldn't get in anywhere. And that was kind of the premiere of law enforcement days. And my uncle works for the Department of Corrections.
Yeah.
He's like, hey man, come work with us. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to be a prison guard, Meanwhile, while this is all happening, my wife starts having me come to church, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to come to church, but I'm not going to do what you crazy Christians do.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to raise my hands, and I'm not going to sing worship songs. Like, that's not cool. But one Sunday, shortly after my son was born, man, my uncle, who's the pastor, like opened up for an altar call, and he's like, hey, whoever's, being led to Christ, like, come up to the front and get prayer. And I was like, no. And then like God's like, hey, like, come give your life. Like, I'm an all or nothing guy, so I knew like if I gave it up, I'd have to live for him, you know? And, we're just going back and forth in my head. I'm like, man, like, nope, I'm not. And God's like, no, yeah, you are. And I'm like, nope. And I remember like gripping the sides of the chair.
Yeah.
And I don't even know why I did that, but I'm like, I'm not going up front. And God's like, no, like, you need to come up front. I'm like, no. So finally, I just found myself walking up to the front. And I'm like,
what am I doing?
No, go sit back down. But my body knew what my mind didn't want to acknowledge is that I needed Jesus, right? Like my body knew that. Like,
wow, man.
And so my body just got up and my body wanted that. So bam, I walk up front. And as soon as I got up front, people started laying hands on me and praying. And in that moment, I was like, all right, God, like, I accept you, Jesus. I accept you as my Lord and Savior. Like, forgive me of my sins. Like, I'm all in. Like, I'm there for you.
You believe.
And I believe, like, instantly. And it wasn't, again, I never doubted God, but I just hadn't had an experienced God before.
Yeah.
And in that moment I did. And I was like, okay, this is what the child in me wanted, right? The kid that was a Mormon that was doubting and didn't believe what the Mormons were preaching. Mm-hmm. This is what feels right. Yeah. This is what God's prepared my heart for all of my life right here in this moment. Like, even the horrible things that I experienced and went through as a kid, that was all preparation for me to receive God on that day.
God knows the timing, man.
Absolutely.
His timing is perfect.
Yeah. So that kind of happened, coincided with trying to get on the road and finally, kind of out of desperation and needing money and providing for my family.
Yeah.
I applied for the Department of Corrections and couldn't get hired on in the Valley. I was like, man, I'm going to go work in the Valley. Like, it's going to be great. Like, they have lots of prisons here in the Salem area. Couldn't get hired on. My score wasn't high enough, like I didn't have any schooling or training or anything. And I was like, oh man, like, what am I going to do? So talking it over with my wife, like, we're like, okay, like, we might have to move to Eastern Oregon, whether it's down in Snake River, whether it's at EOCI in Pendleton or at Two Rivers in Hermiston, or even, Warner Creek, or like anywhere. Like, we have to move out of the Valley to get hired on. And finally, we extended our application to all that, and very shortly after, we got hired on at Two Rivers, which is in Hermiston. We picked up our son and moved over there and left everything we knew. And I mean, I know people have moved farther, but for us, it was a complete shock. Like, we left everything. We left her whole family, my whole family. Like, we abandoned everything we knew and moved. And really, it was one of the best things that ever happened to us. We got pregnant. We had my daughter when we were there. But it really just solidified us as a family unit. And, again, to those of you who are like recently married or, going to get married, when you get married, you are your own family unit. You are not bound to your mom or your dad or your in-laws. You're not bound to the family. So if you want to do Christmas different, you do Christmas different. If you don't want to go over to somebody's house for Easter, you don't go over there for Easter. Whatever you want to do, you are a family. If you want to have family night on Tuesday of, every week, like, you do it, because you are a family unit. And that's really important to set that up, because you can't fly out of somebody else's nest. Right. And
that's right.
And I just see that perpetuating in today's society. It's just like kids just living forever with their parents,
right? Even
married. And it's like the grandparents are raising the grandkids, and the parents don't have to do anything. And it's like, so just take that, like, yeah, it's going to suck. Yeah. You got to start off small.
Well, the scripture says leave and cleave.
Yeah.
And I think the best thing, I have 2 daughters. My youngest daughter got married and they moved to Arizona for about 9 months because her husband was finishing up college. And it was the best thing.
Yeah.
And I'd recommend that 1,000 times over. Leave.
Yep.
Get away.
Yep.
Create your own family dynamics. There's nothing wrong with having family.
Nope.
We want that.
Yep.
But you have to figure out your own family, what you're going to do, what's important, your own traditions. And stop living off mom and dad.
Yes.
We're not breastfeeding anymore, right?
No, you got to wean them off, man. It's you got to, at the end of the day, like, and parents, like, let go of your kids,
I say cut the umbilical cord. I mean, I'm a mama's boy.
Right? Who is?
I'm 10 years into marriage, and I've been married now 33 years. But my wife's like, we need to cut the umbilical cord.
Yeah.
This whole my mom and I love my mom. That's what I mean.
Sure. Yeah.
But I didn't marry my mom. I married my wife.
Exactly.
And so it was hard, but get that.
Yeah.
So keep preaching that.
Yeah. So we were there for about 13 months, and man, I started working in special housing, so segregation, working with a lot of mentally ill, working with the 1% of the population that can't live anywhere else, the troublemakers.
Yeah.
And I started very quickly. I loved the camaraderie of that, even though technically, like, because I was on probation, I wasn't supposed to work in there. They put me in there all the time, and I worked overtime in there. So it's just like they're like, man, like, yeah, go. So we transferred back to the penitentiary here in Salem, where I ended up working for almost 9 years. Transferred back as an officer and started walking through life. I had 2 kids, and it was just, life was, dandy, just going up and down, and normal highs and lows of life.
Yeah.
And then I promoted to corporal. And I was just like, because, again, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it all the way. And I got tired of people above me making decisions I didn't agree with. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do something about it,
A 12-year-old kid saying, step up, stand up, and go do it.
No, for sure. So I started promoting, made it to corporal, and then decided that, I saw some of the guys that were there that were on the SWAT team. I was like, man, I want to be with them. They're the ultimate, 1%. Started moving towards preparing myself to join that. Started trying to apply. First couple times, didn't get it. At the same time, I was trying to apply to become a sergeant, trying to promote again. And, just working through life. And then my wife got pregnant with her twins. And it was a really rough time. I'd started working 12-hour shifts. I started working exclusively in the special housing area, the mental health area, which, again, it's just a very dark area. It's very rough. Like, you see things and experience things that are very traumatic. I've carried a lot of PTSD from things I've had to deal with, things you experience. It's not if something's going to happen, it's when. But I love the camaraderie, man. I love the environment, because it was like I could run from my problems because I couldn't think about anything else except for protection, right? And the next battle that I was going to fight, So it's easy to distract myself from all the baggage I was carrying, whether it's, kids at home, or whether it's, my abuse as a kid or dysfunction or whatever. I could run away from that and just bury myself. And plus, it really spoke to that identity I built of, like, being that tough macho guy of like, I'm going to win any fight, man.
Yep.
So started working pretty heavy in that. And like I said, my wife became pregnant with the twins, and it was a rough pregnancy for her. She's a she's tiny, and carrying twins, it's a lot. And the last couple months, she basically was just bedridden. The doctor's like, hey, we're putting you on a modified bed rest because you got to get these babies to a point where they can be born and survive. So their doctors were concerned, like, hey, like, you can't really be doing strenuous, like, you can't clean the house. Yeah. You can't yeah, do the bare minimum. Like, yeah, you got to get your kids off to preschool. Like, I get that. You got to make meals for your kids while your husband's working. But like, you can literally, like, we don't want you to go into labor because they're not at that point where they're like, they would struggle to survive. So that put a huge strain on our family. Obviously, I'm working, 40 to 50, sometimes 60 hours a week, trying to get overtime, trying to save up money for when the babies are born, trying to buy all the new stuff, because it's like not buying everything for one baby, you're buying it for two. And during that time, I'd been leading a men's ministry, and it was just kind of like, man, we got to step back. My wife and I talked, we got to step back from stuff and just kind of take care of our family. So stepped down from the men's ministry. Fortunately, we were living in a duplex right next to my mother-in-law, so she helped out so much. She was always helping with the kids, kind of helping with the house while I was gone. But yeah, it was a rough season, and I, again, like, it didn't believe in God, but with everything I was experiencing, just kind of started getting into a dark place. And I remember that's when I started to, like, really drink. I'd kind of always drinking, and it was like, yeah, not that big of a deal. Yeah. But that's where I started giving myself permission, where it's like, okay, like, I can go hit the liquor cabinet, and have, 3 drinks tonight, because it was rough,
day.
or like, I can have a couple beers and then, have some whiskeys too. Like, it's okay. Like,
totally.
Like, I'm
justified, man.
I'm powering through, taking care of my family. I'm providing. So it's like, realistically, what I was doing though is self-medicating. Yeah. I was self-medicating from what I sing at work. Yep. I was self-medicating from the stress of, dealing with the family and taking care of the family, and just the stress of, like, are these babies going to come early? Like, are we going to have to spend time in the NICU? And I had a friend at work who just went through a pretty traumatic early pregnancy, and, like, I just saw him struggling and being up at Dornbeckers and stuff, and it was just like, man, I want my babies to come out healthy. So it's just all that just created the perfect melting pot for me to start moving away from my supports. I was working weekends, so I couldn't make it to church. Yeah. And I just started distancing myself. And I had somebody even tell me, like, hey, man, like, you're getting distant. Again, men, we need people who are going to speak into our life. And when you can't see that you're getting distant and you have those safety measures, you need to listen to those, right? You need to sit down and listen. And this guy was just like, hey, man, I'm worried about you. Like, you're not the same. You're kind of distant. Like, you're kind of moving away. Like, you need to, like, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. And my sons were eventually born. They came out healthy. They spent a day in the NICU, praise God. They were great. But shortly after they were born, one of them almost died. He got a UTI. We couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. He wouldn't wake up for like 20 some hours. He wouldn't eat. He wasn't going to the bathroom. The doctors were like, oh, nothing's wrong with him. And we're like, no, like, something's wrong. Finally, they figured out he had a UTI, got him on antibiotics, got him, back in clean bill of health. But again, it was just like one thing after another. And man, Satan loves to work in those times when you're down and you're moving away from your supports. Like, and that's what he started doing with me. He started putting in, like, well, you deserve better than this. Like, you're really struggling right now and nobody's helping out. Like, which the reality of it was, we had tons of help, tons of support. But it's like, it's like Satan loves to stroke your ego. He loves to put those little seeds of doubt and be like, yeah, man, nobody's calling me up and saying, like, how am I doing? Or nobody's coming and taking me out for coffee. And the reality was, people were, but I had isolated at that point and pushed people away. So I was like, no, I'm not going out with you. Or I used excuses like, oh no, I got to spend time with my family, which that turned into spending time with my family. I'm just going to sit on the couch and drink, so it's like at the end of the day, it's like I was pushing myself farther and farther away. And that just led to a really bad rough patch where I was struggling work-wise. Man, I just poured into that. doors started to open up at work. I got promoted to sergeant. I made the SWAT team. Like I was like the premier, you know, I was like, man, this is the best. This is the best. I was loving it. And, man, that just became my identity, right? Because it felt good. It touched back to that, you know, 12-year-old boy of, you know, you can,
if you stand up,
you can stand up.
You're self-sufficient, man.
Yeah, you're good.
Through.
Like you're doing what you're supposed to, you know? And as like shift work's hard, man. It disconnects you from reality and people, you know, and that's something, unless you've worked it, you don't really understand. So if you are working shift work, like make sure you are putting supports outside of whatever shift work you're working to keep you tethered to reality. So anyways, we're going through life and I just got in a really dark place. I was getting to the point where I was just drinking all the time. That was, as soon as I get off work, I'd start drinking till I passed out and wake up, work out, go to work again, trying to catch as much overtime as I could, just trying to bury myself in.
So you were still working out though during this time? Is that what
yeah, every day. That's
part of the PT, part of what you do.
That was for me. Physical therapy is like physically working out is therapy. It's therapeutic. You know, helps me clear my mind, and it lets me push my body to continue to grow, you know? So, I was working out 7 days a week, you know?
So you're working long hours, working out, drinking. I wonder how your wife was doing during this period of time. Was she vocal with you? Like, hey, I'm not doing well. Did she just kind of let you isolate and kind of let you go?
It was kind of both. It was rough because she had 4 kids and like, was it 4 kids under 6? So it was just like, just chaos, right? Yeah. Twins, if you haven't had twins, man, it's like, people think having 1 baby is hard. We'll have 2 that you got to burp, 2 that you got to change, 2 that you got to feed, everything, man. It's like everything's multiplied on top of that, having a toddler and then, you know, having a 6-year-old, like, dude, it's just everything. So like we didn't know, and I don't think we were mature enough to really be able to vocalize like what had happened. She put everything into her kids, into the kids, and her job was like, I'm just going to focus on the kids.
She was doing what you were doing. You were focused on your identity and work. Yep. She was focusing on the kids, and you can hyper focus and get through a season.
Yeah. And that's what we had done. And for me, that season just didn't end. And I got into a really dark, you know, scary place where I was just basically self-destructing. And as I kind of destructed, man, I had spent a lot of time in that special housing realm. Being on the SWAT team kind of came to an end. I had promoted again to lieutenant. So it was like, okay, like I can't be on the SWAT team anymore. So I'm just going to pour more into work more hours, more opportunities, like keep trying to, you know, isolate. And I was winning at work. So it was like, man, that gave me my win. But like I was becoming a monster to my kids and to my wife. Like they didn't even recognize who I was anymore. Man, that's a scary place to be if your wife and your kids look at you as a monster, like, and justifiably so. You know, I was always angry. I was always, you know, just mad, always just raging, just constantly that anger problem I had as a kid just magnified 100 times. And so anyways, I kind of came to a point where I was starting to really struggle at work, struggle at home. Work had become my idol. I had kind of turned my back on God, and I was in church one day and God told me, you know, like you can either have a good long career and you're going to succeed, or you can have your family, but you can't have both. It's one or the other. And at this point, like I was experiencing a ton of health issues, but I was, you know, just powering through. I wasn't telling anybody. I wasn't talking about it. Like I was kind of meeting with my doctor periodically. I basically was like, in that moment, I was like, well, I choose my family. Right? Because I'd seen so many people in the corrections industry that had chosen their career. Yeah. And not one of them were happy. Yeah. And not like all of them struggle, and all of them. And it's like they get done and they retire after 30 years of working a career, which is a great thing to do. Like that's a feat to make it out of that industry. And they don't have anything in life. Their kids don't want to be around them. They're divorced 2, 3, 4 times. Like, they don't have anybody to share life with. And it's just, what's the point in working? And so in my mind, in that moment, I was like, man, and God told me in that moment, like, you can never set foot in a prison again if you choose your family. Like, literally, you can never set foot inside. I was like, okay, like, I guess I'm not setting foot. So left and called my boss after a couple days, called in sick for a few days. Mentally, man, I was just in a really rough place, dark depression, deep depression, like scary, man. Like, when you get in that spot and you're isolated and alone, man, it's like I see where people can complete suicide or do crazy, horrific things because that darkness, man, if you don't have anything to tether you and bring you back, like, that's scary. Yeah. So I called one of my supervisors finally, and I'm like, hey, man, like, I need to meet, like, and he was kind of like, yeah, I was going to, call you, like, we need to figure out what's going on, So I get together with him and I'm like, hey, I'm quitting. Like, I'm not going to, like, I'm going to burn all my sick leave and then I'm done. Like, I'm not going to, and he's just like, whoa. So we unpacked a little bit what was going on, just kind of where I was at in my personal life. And then just kind of got to the point where he's like, well, you're struggling with like mental health stuff. And I'm like, yeah, like, can't find a counselor. And he's like, you're struggling with, stomach issues and stomach pain and like health stuff. Yeah. And he's like, well, go see your doctor, you idiot, and get like a release to go on short and long term. You have that, right? And I'm like, yeah, I got short and long term disability, but I'm a tough man. Like, I'm not going to jump on that. My leg's not broken. Like, come on, And he's like, you've paid into that for 10 years. Like, go on the disability. Like, that's what it's there for. So we went through that. Doctor approved me to be on disability to kind of take care of my medical stuff. And I'm very thankful that supervisor did that. Like, I'm very appreciative of that because through this time, it's been 3 years of walking through healing and repairing things physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and with my family, like all of that. Like, and God's used this time to repair all the damage that I've done, and to bring me to where I'm at today.
God is good, man. It's interesting. He God has showed up in a few places. He's been there all along, by the way, but places where you definitely felt him speak to you, like, when your uncle did the altar call. Yeah. God's like, it's time, Spenser. Yes. No, it's not. You're doing it. Yeah. And then later on, if you want to have a great career, you've got it. Yeah. I mean, we have the ability to. We're guys. We can power through. I'm that same guy. But if you want to have a great relationship and don't go through a divorce and lose your kids, and then you're going to stop doing one and pick the other. Yeah. So to me, you picked right. Yeah. Well, you're 3 years into not working in the correction facility. You're more at church. So what do you do at church now? And how's your life changed?
So like you said at the beginning, my wife and I are the youth pastors. And man, like, I love pouring into people. Like, that's my true passion. And I love pouring into men and raising up men. And I love pouring into this generation of kids because it's such a rough world out there for them. Like, and it's like I'm able to relate in a lot of ways because I struggle with the same thing a lot of them struggle with today, and that's identity. I struggled with it in different ways as a child, but it's like, man, just pouring into the students is like amazing, and pouring into men and raising up men, because that's where my heart is raising up men, pouring into men, encouraging men, and helping them like realize like this idea that I talk about all the time, man. It's like Jesus was not always the lamb, right? He's not this weak, meek God. Like, he was for a season, a very short season, but the Bible speaks more about him being a warrior and coming and fighting for his people than it does about him being crucified, right? And just being weak and taking whatever the world threw at them. And so I love like sharing that with men. It's like, hey, it's okay to be a warrior. It's okay to fight, man. It's okay to have that spirit, to be macho, to love guns, to love to, wrestle, to fight, like all of those things. It's great, but you got to do both. You got to be the warrior and the lamb.
Well, you and I talked a little bit about the Warrior Poet, the book.
Yeah.
How do you go get deployed and go in combat to war, and then come home and love your wife and be this gentle soul that your wife needs? How do you become that Warrior Poet? It's an interesting question. Here's the deal: if we don't know who our identity is in, then we're going to make up our own identity. And if our identity is in Christ, then we can do that.
Yeah.
So, well, dude, this is great. As we wrap up here, what are some things that you think about that maybe you want to unpack for the audience? Maybe there's something on your heart, on your mind that you haven't quite got all of it out yet, but you want to share with some people to impact them. What would that be?
Man, I think first and foremost, like we need men to step up in this world.
Man.
Right? Like at the end of the day, men, the world has the problems that it has today because we are not willing to do the uncomfortable thing. And we're too busy with our creature comforts to break out of the mold and to stand out. And we're way too scared to be uncomfortable, and we're too scared of what people might say or what they might think or what we might lose to actually stand up and fight and protect what we're called to. And that starts first and foremost with your relationship with God. We should have an uncompromising, unwavering relationship with God, and unapologetic as well. Like, secondly, if you're married, your wife comes second to God. Before your kids, before your hobbies, before your job, your wife comes next. And then if you have kids, your kids are third, right? Again, before your hobbies, before your job, your kids come third. And then comes your job. And then after that, the church. And then after that, it's everything else. But if you don't put those things in a row and you're not willing to stand up and fight, and I'm not saying you need to come in and again, like you said at the beginning, I'm the law around here. No, but it's love and grace to your kids. It's love and grace to your wife, but also being able to protect them and stand up for them.
Yeah. That's good. This was past weekend. We had a little men's group at my house, and one of the Bible verses, one of my favorite ones is this here. It says, this is 1 Corinthians 16, 13 and 14. It says, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. And then it ends with this, let all you do be done in love. Yeah. Gotta act like men.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't know what a man looks like. We think a man is, a guy who works a lot and might beat somebody up. That's not a man.
No.
A man is somebody who, like you said, puts God first.
Yep.
Wife second.
Yep.
And I agree with you 1,000%. Kids are third.
Yep.
The problem with a lot of people is they put their kids actually before their spouse. My question to men is like, so how does your wife feel about that you actually put your kids first?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I've never asked her. I think you should actually ask your wife. Yeah. I'm not joking. That's one of my favorite things to do. Sure. My girls knew when I come home from work, I said, girls, hey, who gets the first hug? Mommy.
Yep.
And that was always the deal.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
So I won't waver on that. But, well, brother, we're going to wrap up right here. You and I are going to do this again. I love your journey. I love where God has you. He's got your heart, all of it.
Absolutely.
And you're all in.
Yeah.
You want to influence men. We want to influence you too. By the way, out there who listen every week, we appreciate you, by the way. I would ask you to subscribe to our channel, share it. I'd love a review. Not me personally, but for our guests, if you could just give us a review and let us know what you're learning from this, how it's challenging you. And for the men, act like men, be around men, be sharpened. The word says iron sharpens iron as one man sharpens another man. Well, if we're isolating, like Spenser was talking about, you're not being sharpened. So I like hanging around guys, and I'm going to keep hanging around guys because I need to be sharpened. My wife needs me to be sharpened as well. So anyway, we appreciate you, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, Spenser. Appreciate you too.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah.